from there. All right, welcome back. We are WEBD6201 in the winter 2021 semester at Durham, and it's week 1, part 2 of our broadcast. We're going to continue with what we were talking about yesterday. Yesterday we kind of introduced the course and myself. We talked about the course outline, the book, all that kind of stuff, as well as what we're doing this week, which is tools, downloads, and development. We talked about the video requirements and those kind of things. And then we did a bunch of downloads, including Visual Studio and Git, as well as Node.js and a bunch of other stuff. Today, I'm going to start by talking about a little bit about progressive enhancement. I'm not going to read all the slides there for you to look at if we're going to have any kind of quiz around this stuff. So one of the things that that we want to talk about first is, before we get into what JavaScript is and what it's for, it's all around the content. Without content, really, at the end of the day, there is no need for structure. There is no need for anything, really, at the end of the day. You need to have some content. So we're going to build up some content for our course as we move forward. So that's one thing I want to tell you. That's what the kind of the need to build some content out is. Not because I want to make this a content course, but it's definitely there. And the idea of progressive enhancement, and I'm just going to talk really briefly about this, is all around kind of a 3-pillar approach, right? Where we have, or a layered approach. And the 3 pillars, if you will, or layers are structure, presentation, and behavior, right? So it kind of looks like this. I'm just going to skip over here to this one, where the structure of your pages, your HTML, basically wraps around your content. And then what we do on top of the structure is we add a presentation layer, which is with your CSS, right? Now, traditionally most developers are terrible at CSS because CSS is like magic to them. They don't understand how it works, or they really don't care. This isn't a CSS course, and you should have had an intro into what CSS is. So again, I'm not going to go through the details of everything around CSS, but we need some of it so we can have some kind of presentation. Without good presentation and structure, who cares about behavior, right? We don't care about a behavior if we don't have the first 2. So that's why this is a layered approach to building web applications, right? And I'm talking about it here because largely, when we get into building JavaScript web application or JavaScript enabled web applications, people forget that there's actually other stuff that we need to know about. For example, the elements that are kind of wrapping around our content, which is HTML. All right, so that's kind of the layered approach that I'm taking with this course. One of the things that we have is not just about wrapping stuff with elements, but the idea of semantic meaning. All right, so and you guys, again, should have learned something about that, but I'm going to assume that you didn't. So, you have this idea of a web page, and all these tags, what they are is a series of nodes or containers. So what ends up happening is, if you notice the HTML tag at the top of this page and at the bottom, that's one big container, right? Or one big node. Think about this as the actual document itself. And inside the HTML container, you have other containers, the head and the body. Those 2 containers, if you will, or elements, contain other elements. And that hierarchy of element containment is the way we're going to access and manipulate the document. And again, the idea of a document object model is that we have the document itself, and inside the document we have several nodes, and each node is considered an object. And coming from a C++ perspective, because most of you have come from a C++ background, when we want to access or manipulate any one of these nodes, we're going to do so by getting a reference to the node. And we're going to do that in a couple ways. One, we're going to have some kind of document access. We're going to access the document and hook into that particular element, if you will. That's how we're going to call it. We're going to hook into it or get a reference to the element. And once we have a reference to the element, and you should know about some kind of application development because you've done Windows forms. At this point, you should have already done that. Last semester, we also did some windowing with Java in OOP3200, if you had me for that. So you've done it one or more times over the last few semesters at least. And so now this shouldn't be a surprise for you that we're going to do the same thing. We're going to hook into it. We're going to have a back end, which is going to be the JavaScript. And we're going to have a front end, which is going to be your CSS and HTML. Okay. But it's all, again, client side. This is all client side. There's also, the server side, which we're going to get into near the end of the course. So we can add meaning to some of this stuff where we add, instead of div tags alone, we can add header, nav, section, article, aside, footer, and so on. And these have been introduced in HTML5. All right, so it's not something new. It's been around for a while. You guys should know something about them. We also want to make our pages accessible and inclusive. So you might see some accessibility tags and some of that stuff that we're going to add into our pages as we develop. The presentation layer, of course, is CSS, and we're not covering CSS, but what we're going to use today is Bootstrap. And when I was talking to Austin yesterday, he indicated that you guys have used Bootstrap or know about Bootstrap from a previous semester or so. So it's not going to be something completely new, but basically it's just a CSS framework because this is not a CSS course. So we're going to do that. And the CSS basically, it searches, if you will, for WEBD6201. Great. So it's going to connect with each of the elements, and there's different ways of doing that. So for example, you can do inline CSS. That's very bad. We don't want to do this. And the problem with inline CSS is it's only specific to that particular line and not to any other line in the page. So that's bad. And by the way, inline anything you'll see is also bad for JavaScript. There's also embedded CSS, which is just something that we put in the actual style sheet, the sheet itself. And then, of course, there is linking up your style sheet separately. And that's the way we want to do things. And that's the way I've started with you guys, something like this. Okay. Similarly, when we go into talking about the behavior part, we have three parts to it. We can do it inline. No, we don't. You and I are not going to do it inline. We can do it embedded. No, we're not going to do it this way as well. These are both bad ways. And we'll talk about the disadvantages of these things. They can be used to solve problems sometimes in a limited fashion, but we want to really focus on this external JavaScript, which is, yes, that's the way we want to do it. Why? Well, you'll see in inline JavaScript, it only works for one line. For example, on line 22 here, in this example, we have a list item and an anchor tag. And when there's an onClick function that's running inline. And basically what this does, it's an event that triggers when you click on the About link, and then it'll generate an alert. First of all, alerts are terrible. We don't want to use these ever unless it's urgent. We let the user know something's happening. Like if we're going to delete something, that makes sense. But typically it takes the user out of regular operation, and it's a modal form that comes up. That means you can't continue using your page until the alert is taken care of, like you pressed OK on it or something, right? So until that's resolved, it's going to just hang your page, which is not good. So that is one problem. The problem is that line 22, it's only going to work for this line if it's inline. That's a disadvantage. Advantage, it's easy to put it in line, right? We can just pop it in there. Bad things are, we can never use this again. If I make another page, I'm going to have to, embed something inline again, and that's terrible. The next one, of course, I'm just going to skip over here because this is pretty obtrusive, right? The next way of doing JavaScript is embedded, where we actually have two script tags, a script tag at the top and a script tag at the bottom, and we embed JavaScript like this in a page. Again, advantage, easy to do. We don't have to have an extra file. Disadvantage, it's obtrusive, and it's only specific to that page. So if I want to reuse my JavaScript, I need to copy paste this stuff over and over again. Bad. We have one of the precepts that we're going with as good programmers is do not repeat yourself, or the DRY acronym, do not repeat yourself. And this will not really, does not subscribe to that thing at all. All right, so we don't want to do embedded JavaScript. So the right way to do it, of course, and the way that I want you to do it is external and unobtrusive JavaScript is what we want to do, where we kind of use a script tag like we did yesterday, and it injects the JavaScript in the page as the browser interprets what the JavaScript is. Okay, so that's what it is, and this is the idea that we're going with. I'm not going to read the rest of this. It's some really good information around progressive enhancement, and what progressive enhancement means is we start with good content. Okay, just as a review. So that's number one. We start with good content. Number two, we make sure that the content is structured well with HTML tags. We wrap good HTML around the content, right? No good HTML, no good content. Who cares about behavior? We don't really care about JavaScript if we don't have those two things. The next one is presentation. Does it look okay? If it doesn't look okay, if it looks like terrible, and there's no presentation value whatsoever, again, the value of the application is terrible. Okay, again, this is not a CSS course, so we won't be doing much in terms of custom CSS in this course, but we will be using Bootstrap, like I said. And finally, behavior, we're going to enable JavaScript to work in our pages, and we're going to do that externally. All right, let's get to the other part that I want to talk about today, which is Git and GitHub. And I know that you guys have had some kind of version control training, or it's been talked about in some of your courses. I know I talked about it in OOP 3200 last semester with my students that were in that course. And you may have had it in other courses as well. But I want you to think about it like so. So let's take a look at, imagine if, and I'm just going to draw this here. So imagine if I have my file system. Think about this as my project folder. And my project folder is where I do all my work. So I kind of do all my stuff here in my project folder, and I work, and then suddenly something happens to my machine and it dies. And if my machine dies, I lose all my work. So that's a bad thing. So if I was going to think about the 3 reasons to use version control, let's start typing these things. So version control, or revision control as it's called as well, right? There's a couple of reasons to use this thing, or a few reasons. So the first reason would be, well, it's backup, right? I mean, worst case scenario, if something happens to my project folder, if it's local to my machine, then I lose my work, and that's not really great. So backup would be the first reason to use version control, all right, for sure, right? And then the next one is, okay, cool. I can have a backup. Maybe it's going to be offline, but what about if I use things like Google Drive or OneDrive or whatever? Yeah, that might solve the problem for backup, but what it doesn't solve is, what about if I want to keep track of all my features? So I add a feature, and then I have a versioning system, a custom versioning system that I use on Google Drive. I put version 1, right? Version 2, version 3, version 4, and then I'm like, wait, what did I add in version 1? I don't know. What did I add in version 2? Who knows? But I'm using version 3. That's the latest version. Sure, you can keep version notes, you can do all kinds of stuff, but it's so much work for you to do. And chances are what could also happen is you can't keep track of which one, especially if you come back to a project that you haven't been working on for a very long time. Let's say, for example, you come back a year or two later. That's a long time in terms of project development. You come back and you're like, so what did I do here? You can't remember what you were working on and what the versioning means. It means nothing to you. You might even erase all the older versions because you don't know. So so the next reason to use version control in general, version control system, is revision control. right? Versioning, or also called revision control, right? So this is a real second reason for using it. If you don't do this, then, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, you can't keep track of what you've added in very easily. And the third reason we want to use this is because, guys, we don't work alone in any kind of software development industry. We always work with somebody else. So again, I could share my Google Drive, right, or my OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever you're using these days, or I could even pass you a USB stick when we're together when it's not COVID. But at the end of the day, however we do it, it's a really bad solution, right? If I pass it to you in one of those ways, if I change something or if you change something, how are we gonna, are we gonna pass files back and forth? It doesn't make any sense, right? So again, the next good reason for using a version control system is collaboration, or teamwork, which is another way of saying collaboration, right? So that's what we want to do. We want to use collaboration, right, with version control. And so then it becomes not just just version control, but it becomes a version control system, right? And a version control system, the way it works is it's something that is first local to our machine. So we initialize a version control system here. And then what we want to do is we want to take this offline somehow into a service. And one of the most popular services we're going to be talking about today is GitHub. Okay, it's just a service. So what you saw me doing yesterday was I initialized the Git repository, and I did a bunch of stuff. I'm going to go over the commands here, and I'm recording it live on YouTube. So worst case scenario, if you forget what I've done here or whatever, you can always go back and watch this video and see, what all this stuff means. So imagine that again. Let's continue with the analogy and go down here and make sure that all this is flattened. So imagine I have several files here in my folder. I want to keep track of all of them. And I'm using all this kind of stuff. One thing to note is I want to initialize my repository first. So the first command I'm going to use when I initialize my repository, and I'll put all the commands up here on this thing, is git init. So what git init does is it creates a hidden .git folder. Okay, that's what it does. So git init does that, all right? And that's the first step that we want to use. If 2 or 3 people are working on the same file and a commit at the same time, does the file take all 3 changes? No, Muzda. That's one of the problems that we're going to have with when you work with more than one person. You need to do something called merging, and merge management in general can be quite challenging to do, which we'll talk about. All right, so let's continue. So that is git init. That's the first command we want to use. And the second thing we want to do is git add. So the git add command adds any specific file one at a time, or I can add as many files as I want by using git add dot. Git add dot says I want to add all these files to something called the staging area. So again, this means adds one or more files to the staging area. Okay, that's what this means. Okay. And we'll put that maybe over here. All right, so git add dot. And what is the staging area? I'm just going to draw this out again, and I'll erase some of this later on. So we need to make some more room in our page. I have my folder structure. So here's my folder again. Folder. Right? I select files with git add dot or git add whatever. I can add one or more files here. And then whatever files I select, they get kind of added to something called the staging area. And the staging area is another container that's held inside of the hidden .git folder, right? That's what it does, right? So the staging area is here. So this is the staging area. And the staging area basically says, these are the files that I'm going to commit. Okay, so there's a staging step, if you will, and that's what git add dot is. So I haven't quite made the commit. All I've done is selected the files. And that selection process is tracked. You can also unselect or deselect the files before you commit them if you make a mistake. Let's say I don't want to select every single file for some reason. You can do that with your commit. Okay. So that's the staging area. The next thing I want to do after git add dot is make my commit typically. So it's git commit minus M means message, minus M for message. And then your friendly message in quotations, which normally for the first time you do a commit, it's initial commit or first commit. Those are the two things that you do. So this, what this does is it, takes a snapshot of your files the way they are in that initial state, if you will. All right, that's what this does. Okay, so git commit minus M, right? Initial commit takes a snapshot of your files for the first time, and those are the first three commands you're gonna issue. By the way, it doesn't matter whether you do it in command line or if a tool is doing it for you. If you're using Git Kraken or your favorite Git control tool or whatever, it's going to do these things in the background. So it's good for you guys to know what they are. And that's why I'm mentioning them here. Okay. So these three commands. Once you're at this step, you've done backup to some degree and versioning. But unfortunately for backup, if your machine still dies at this point, these three commands don't do anything for you. You have to take this, your folder and your project work offline somehow and send it somewhere. And again, we don't want to send it to Google Drive or anything like that. Okay, so that I'm just mentioning this so you understand the process for this kind of stuff altogether. All right, let's bring up our brush, erase some of this stuff. So, yeah. So talked about this, the staging area, and now let's make some room for the rest stuff. So we know what the real reason. So these are the three reasons. We have version control. Again, we talked about, we have backup versioning and collaboration. And I want to move this so we don't lose it. I'll probably put it over there just so you guys can see it. All right. Again, just drawing away. Going back to my pen for a second, and let's also do a bit of a selection here. There we go. And we will move this. Let's go. All right, so yeah, so we've taken care of some of this stuff at this point. We've taken care of versioning to some degree. So this part we've taken care of, right? That's what we've done. Taken care of this, right? But we haven't taken care of backup or collaboration yet. And the way to do that, and I want to point this out to you guys, is let's suppose we have this area, this kind of, cloud, and I know I'm making a bad cloud, but hopefully my little drawing tool will help me out, make it better. Yeah, there we go. And what we have is another container that's up here that mirrors what we have down here. One thing to note about repositories, which is what we're talking about, the repositories that are held online, so this is, a repository online, and usually you have some kind of service. There's several different ones, the most popular being GitHub. There's also GitLab, and there's also Bitbucket, but GitHub is just an online cloud-based service that basically hosts repositories, which are just in the beginning empty containers. One thing to note about repositories is you do not have direct access. So you can't manipulate folders like you would in your file system. You have to connect to them, and I've put it way over here for a reason. You have to connect to them with some kind of remote connection. So that's what you need. You need some kind of connection that goes from your file system to the GitHub or your cloud service. So we're going to draw a line here. And this line, this connection is called a remote. Again, these are the terminologies you need to understand. It doesn't matter whether you're using, Git and GitHub or Perforce or something else. There's some kind of remote connection. This connection is not persistent, so it's not something that's always on. You have to you use this connection only when you need to pull or push on those things. What do those terms mean? I mean, it's pretty intuitive what those mean, but we're going to go through it. So when I push means I'm going to send information to the repository. So that's a push command, right? And then what we want to do, let's try that again. Sorry, just trying to do this for completeness. So yeah, we push up. It's like an upload. That's what it is to GitHub. And then again, you can intuit that if we pull, it's going in the other direction. It's going to kind of come down into our project folder. Okay, we got to be careful when we pull and we push, because as Muzda kind of asked earlier, how is that going to affect if I work with other people, right? Well, there's a couple of strategies when you work with a partner on doing this. One, you can have something called a Git director. So someone who's in charge of basically pushing and pulling, and you work together to have kind of a merge party that you do. This is a very simple way of doing it and kind of a dumber way, but you can do it. And then what you do is you trade files and you push everything up to GitHub, and then it's shared with everybody. That's one way of doing it. Or you can use something called a pull request, which is a better way of doing it. And we're not going to go into that this semester. That's because this is not a Git and GitHub course. I just want you to know the basics of how this works. All right, so we push up to GitHub, it goes into the repository, and then once we've done this pushing, then what ends up happening is we have taken care of the next reason, right? We've done backup, right? Backup is done, versioning is done, and because we pushed it up to GitHub and it's available online, we can make private and public repositories. You could have collaboration working as well. So you have all these three reasons why we're using version control in the first place. There's a need for this, right? To do this. So this is the way we're doing it. Now the commands. So git init, git add dot, git commit -m initial commit. Finally, we need to set up a remote. So this is the next command. So remote, we say git remote, right? Add. We name it. Normally the by default, the default remote is called origin. That's just a convention. You can call it whatever you want. And then the path to the remote, something like https://github.com/ your accounts, right? / your repo.git. That's kind of what it is. That's what it looks like. Okay. I know it looks long, but actually, this is kind of the next command. Okay. So you add a remote. Once this remote is added, now there's a path for me to push and to pull from. That's how it works. Okay, so let's do a pull. So if I do a git pull, right, that is something that we can get from the remote. We can also do a git push, right? So a git push, right, is kind of the next command, git push. And git push will push everything from here up. Typically git push, and when you first do it, we kind of add a -u for unconditional across the origin remote into the main branch. That's kind of the way we do it. So those are the things we add to the line when we first do it. The first time we do it, we do this, and then afterwards we can just push. Recurring. So what happens after you do this is all first initialization steps when we kind of push it and we create the repository for the first time. The repository needs to be created before you can create a remote. Okay, we can't have a remote to nowhere. Right, the repository has to be made, right? So that's why we do GitHub in the first place. Go up to GitHub, make a repository, and then do all these other steps, okay? Sometimes a tool will help you do all of this at once, okay? And it does everything in the background for you. But again, great thing about a tool is you don't have to think about it. Bad thing about a tool is you don't have anything to think about, right? It does everything for you, and there's not a lot of learning. So so that's why I'm going through the details with you right now. So recurring, so things that we do over and over again. If I have another thing, if I add a file or a feature, every time we add a feature or a file or a change to our project, we want to kind of repeat some of these steps, right? So again, if I add a feature is what I want to do, or a fix, so some kind of break fix, kind of thing. Then if I want to do that, then the commands are going to be the same. It's going to be git add dot, right? Git commit -m, and then we say what the feature is, added feature, whatever the feature is, or fixed fixed issue, whatever the issue that I fixed, and then git push. Really, those are what we're going to be doing. And we're going to be doing these things over and over again, right? So git add dot, git commit, and then push. Keep doing that over. And if you're working alone, that works great. If you're working with somebody else, you may have to pull initially to get the latest version of the GitHub repo. And then once you work on the latest version of the repository, then you push back up. That could be a way of doing it too. Again, this is a very high-level way of thinking about how this whole thing works, but I wanted to point it out to you because I'm going to be doing it throughout the entire semester. And I don't want you to say, what is Tom doing here? Right? Why is it being done this way? Why are we using command line? This is the reason why. Okay, any questions around this structure and what this does for us? By the way, while you're thinking about any kind of questions you want to ask, think about this. This is Git and GitHub. It's the easiest way, again, and I've mentioned this before, to, when you're talking to a prospective employer, to show your work. Here, look, here's my code. This is an application I built. Take a look at my repository here. This kind of thing. Because, people want to see your work. People want to see what you've done. And this is a great way of doing it, right? So it's not just sharing with other people, like your teammates, but also with the community. Okay, so this is what we're doing here. I meant to ask if we can get the Zoom link in the class Discord, since your announcements will eventually push the link away. Yeah, you know what, Nick? I could, but if you notice, if you launch your Zoom, application, there's a pull down, right? And it remembers your last link. It'll remember this link. But sure, I could do that if you need that. I'll post that in the announcements area. Okay, so that is this, and let's move on to the actual work now. So I'm going to pull up what we started with yesterday. So we had some stuff. This is what we're going to do today. I'm just going to close this down, and let's pull up our folder. Just going to pull up a folder here on the desktop, and what we had is under week 1A. Here's week 1A. That's what we were working with. We had this, right? That's what we did last day. Okay. What we want to do today is add some helper, more information in here. As an example, so we can add CSS, because our page right now, if I was going to issue a control backtick, and if I did a light dash server like we did last day, then what we're going to see is, here is our light dash server. Here's hello world, right? Let's push this to the right. And then I'm going to use this on the left like we've done before. And if I was to do this, you can see that the styling here is pretty bad, right? I mean, really, it's just styles that come from the browser. So what we want to do is we want to use Bootstrap for this, right? And where is Bootstrap? What is Bootstrap? Well, if you look up online, if you go to getbootstrap.com, this is where Bootstrap lives. Okay, so it good and bad. And you can see that there are installation steps that we're going to take right now. But instead of using npm, what I want to use instead is something called yarn. Okay, so yarn is if I go to yarn package manager, so yarnpackage.com. I'm going to put this up on our DC Connect as more links. So again, going back to lecture, right? I'm going to add a new URL, right? New URL, and it's going to be yarn, right? So what yarn is kind of a better version of npm in some ways for front end. For the back end, I probably might still use npm, but for the front end, yarn allows us to do a little bit much quicker in terms of adding packages to our environment, if you will, packages for a particular project. And in the getting started, in the installation steps, we're going to do an npm install -g yarn, just like we did last day. What I want you guys to do is I want you guys to go into the command prompt The safe way to do it is to right click and run as administrator, right? And you don't have to do this all the time, but for my system, I certainly do. And then I'm going to do issue an npm install -g or yarn -g. Remember how npm works. Npm is the package manager, install is the verb, yarn is the package, -g is global, right? We're just specifying global. If we don't put the -g, then it only is local. We don't want that to happen. So let's push that and we'll add that in. You can see that I've got a new package. You should have that too. Are you with me? Check marks if you're with me, X if you're not. So yarn is a pretty important piece because yarn will help us grab stuff from the internet. Right? One thing to also understand how this works and everything else when it comes to yarn and everything else. I'm just waiting for more check marks here. Calvin, are you good or no? And Michael, Nick, I don't see your check mark yet. Tom, I see your check mark. I'm just looking through the participants panel here because I want to make sure I can move on and you guys are all up to date with me. Okay, Nick, you're good. Just Calvin and Michael, and then we'll move on. And I'm not going to wait too much longer, guys. I just want to make sure we're good. What? Coffee? You're not allowed to make coffee. Calvin, just if you could put in the Michael and Calvin. I can look at the chat. There's only a few of you guys, but I would prefer if you guys put it in the participants panel. It's just easier for me to check marks. All right. So that means everyone's good. Thank you for that feedback. And welcome to our peer mentor who's just joined us. So we've done yarn right now. And what we want to do, thanks, Michael. What we want to do is I want to go back into our project files here. And I'm just going to maximize this. I'm going to use the start button up arrow. And I'm going to press plus on the terminal here. So I'm going to add another terminal within Visual Studio Code, right? And what I want to do here is I want to issue some yarn commands, okay? So the first command I want to use with yarn is yarn init. Let's do that together. Yarn init. And what yarn init does is it kicks off a little wizard, if you will, or batch file process. The first question I'm going to get is, hey, what is your repository called? What is this thing you're making? Right? We know because last day we had up on github.com/Durham Programmer, we made our repository called WEBD6201 Winter 2021 Week 1C. That's what we made, right? So this is kind of what we should call our project down here as well. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say WebD. I have to do it in lowercase, by the way, when you're doing these things. WebD6201 Winter 2021, and then it's going to be Week 1C because you guys are the third time I've done this demo. Should we close our command first? Yeah, it's okay. You could, but it's not really that necessary in this case. All right, so if I did this and I press enter, that's the question. First, the next one is, what's the version of my application? 1.00 is okay. Sometimes people like to go 0.01. It's really semantics at this point for you guys. It's not really that important. I'm going to leave it at 0.01 because we just started doing this. My description, it's a demo project for WebD. You can put caps here, 6201 week 1, right? That's what this thing is. Entry point's not important. Let's press enter. Notice that it picks up my, what it did was it picked up my repository URL, right? So it said, hey, this is who I am, Durham Programmer. Because I had already initialized a repository, Yarn detected it, and so kind of looked at my remote and injected it here. So I don't have to actually put it in. I can just press enter. It also figured out who I was from my repository because I have a Git repository added for this already. It noticed who the main author is. That's me. Enter. And from an MIT license perspective, you can use a license if you want, or none. I'm just going to leave it as MIT. Doesn't mean anything for us right now. Enter. And is my repository private or not? And the answer is no, I don't care about that right now. Let's just put enter. Once I've done that, we follow through the wizard steps, and I have a package.json file that gets created. Okay, package.json. I say JSON, some people say JSON, everyone, or JS on. There's different ways of saying this. I like saying JSON because it's easy. But basically what a package.json is, .json, right? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. That's what it stands for. And what this is, what we're seeing here in this script, because that's what it looks like, is a visual representation of a JavaScript object. What that means is the curly braces are basically the scope of the object. Okay, that's what it is. And then what you have is a series of properties in quotation marks. Okay, so these are all the properties. So name is a property, and to the right of the property, after the colon, is the value of the property. So name, the value is WEBD6201, winter 2021, week 1C. That's the value of the name property. And each property is separated by commas. What we're doing here is we're actually creating an instance of an anonymous object, a JavaScript object that we are creating. And we're storing it in file format in this .json file. By the way, this format, JSON, is the de facto standard for sending data through an application programming interface on the back end. We send data objects just like this, formatted almost exactly in this way, from the back end to our front end. Okay, we're going to talk about that more as we approach the latter half of the semester. All right, so that is a JSON object. But what this means for us, this package.json, think about this as almost like a project manifest, right? Similar to what it's kind of a partner to my index.html file. My package.json says, hey, this is the name of my project and there's some information about my project. But more than that, when we add packages, it keeps track of our dependencies, which you're going to see in a second, as we add one package after the other. So that's why it's important to have a package.json file. All right, great. So we've done that. Are you with me? Check marks if you're with me, X if you're not, somehow if this failed. You can certainly do it again. You can rerun yarn init a second time, not a problem. It just reinitializes everything. So you can definitely do it again. All right, so it looks like most of you are good. Calvin, did you have you figured out how to do the check mark yet? All right. So yeah, so that's how it works. So let's move on. All right, and I'll wait for Muzda to redo that. Okay, so I'm going to clear this. And the next command I want to issue is I want to get Bootstrap. I want to get Bootstrap. And remember, we just said Bootstrap is up here. So there's one way of doing it. I could go and download it. The other way of getting Bootstrap is to use something called a CDN. So if I do a CDN, it stands for a content delivery network. And if I want to find the content delivery network for Bootstrap, right, as an example, you can find, there's CDN.js, right, where you can find links to the content delivery or the content that I want. For example, if I want to get Bootstrap and I don't want to have it locally on my files, but I can go on the web and kind of inject Bootstrap in my files, it's totally cool. And when we're running a a server in deployment mode, when I'm in production, as an example, I'd rather use a CDN, a content delivery network, to do it. Why? First of all, most people, when you go to a site and you download something from a CDN, your browser caches it, right? And so what happens is if I go back to another website that uses the same library, because it's cached in the browser, loading will actually be faster than if you load from a server. Okay, so that's one thing to note. For us, what we're going to be doing is we're not going to be using the CDN version of Bootstrap, and we're not going to download the files. I'm not going to sit there and download each of the files individually. That's a real pain. what I want to do instead is use Yarn to get it for me. And notice that there are package managers that you can use here on the side when I say download. If I go to Yarn, then you can see that there is the command yarn add Bootstrap. I don't want to do the at next. That'll give me the latest version of Bootstrap. I want to just do the current version. So it's yarn add Bootstrap. Add is the verb that I'm going to use with Yarn. So let's go back to this and do that. Yarn add Bootstrap. And if I press enter, it gets Bootstrap. It saves it inside of node modules, and it adds a dependency to my package.json file all at once. Are you with me? All right, let's see if you've done this part. Once we've done one, I won't check so often, but I need to know that you can do this. Are you with me? Do you see the same thing that I see, right? So yarn add Bootstrap. Yarn add Bootstrap. Okay, I'm waiting for everyone else to come on board, and I want to see those green lights come on in our little participant panel. Tom, are you with us yet? Yes, good. And I'm still waiting for Michael, Calvin, and Muzda. All right, thank you, Muzda and Michael. Okay, so we're going to move on. Thank you for that. So this is Bootstrap, and this is great. Once we have this, it's great. But we also need to enable Bootstrap to work. Bootstrap has some requirements. All right, so if I go back to Bootstrap for a second, when it comes to getting started with Bootstrap, so if I go Introduction, I need a link to Bootstrap. I need the bundle Bootstrap, and notice it says bundle.min.js, right? So every Bootstrap JavaScript plugin and dependency with one or two bundles, both bootstrap.bundle.js and bootstrap.bundle.min.js include Popper for our tooltips and popovers. That's what it says here. Or you can do it separately like so, all right? Separately like so. So this is new. And in the past, what we used to do is we used to have Bootstrap was also enabled by jQuery. So we're going to download jQuery anyway for backwards compatibility. And what we're also going to do is use the bundle.min.js this time around when we enable it in the JavaScript side. So this is what we need to do. So I need to download a couple more things, Popper.js, and I need to download, I also have to download jQuery. So let's do that. By the way, jQuery, if you're interested, is found on jQuery.com, right? So jQuery.com. And let me put in some links for Bootstrap here, just in case you want to get to them. So if I go to create a link, right? And we're going to go here, and I'm going to go to, home. So I'm going to go to bootstrap.com. There we go, get Bootstrap. So there's Bootstrap. This is for yourself to figure this out. Okay, so there's Bootstrap. And I'm also going to, we've already got Yarn and Bootstrap. I'm going to put jQuery in there too, because jQuery is another link that we're going to need. Remember, I mentioned this earlier. What jQuery is a helper library that we used to use a lot, right? Nowadays, we don't need to use jQuery as much because JavaScript by itself, vanilla JavaScript, does a lot of it. A lot of the stuff that jQuery did before by itself, right? As an example, but now we can do it with just JavaScript, a lot of it. And jQuery still is helpful for Ajax, which we'll see later on in this semester. All right, so that's the next one. We're going to add more links to this in a second. All right, so we need jQuery and we need Popper.js. Popper.js, by the way, if you look that up, Popper.js, it is actually another little tooltip and popover positioning engine. That's what it does, right? So it's another little helper library that Bootstrap is using. And notice I can use npm to install it, right? Popper.js/core. That's what it is, right? Or if I want to install Popper this way. Or I can also use Yarn to do the same thing. Okay, so notice that every one of these things has a installation step, right? So again, the key is /core, right? If you don't do it that way, then you're not going to get the right version. So let's get all those things in our files. So next one, we're going to go back here Clear the screen, and let's get jQuery. So yarn add jQuery. All right, we want to get that one. So that becomes a dependency. Okay, clear. Yarn add, again, popper JS/core, right? And we want to get that too. Now, if it fails like this, a lot of times what it is just syntax. So notice that it says at popperjs.core. So let's try this. So yarn add at popperjs/core. And if everything goes well, it'll add popperjs in there as well. It's important to get all this stuff going. And by the way, if it complains, Bootstrap, notice it says, warning, Bootstrap at 4.5 has unmet dependencies, popper.js 1.16, 1.16.1 or higher, right? Popper.js 1.16.1 or higher. So if I make a mistake, let's say, for example, popper.js is nice, but it's, it's something that's not taken care of. What if I was to remove it? So if I go to yarn, because we want to learn yarn too, yarn help, right? You can see that yarn adds, yarn, right? If you scroll down, can remove, right? Yarn can unlink, unplug. There's a bunch of little commands that that you can do with yarn. So let's remove it. Let's make, we've added the wrong one. Let's yarn remove, and then it's at popper.js/core. If I did that, then you're going to see that it takes it out. So adding and removing dependencies is super easy with yarn and with npm, and this is why we want to do it. So what if I did something else? What if I tried intuitively to add something like yarn add popper.js? Let's say if I did this, let's see what this does for me. Is this the right version? And again, if you notice, it says I've added 1.16.1, and this is exactly it's looking what it's looking for. It's looking for popper.js at 1.16.1 or higher. Okay. Also notice this. It says so 1.16.1, you can find the new popper v2 at popperjs.core. This package is dedicated to the legacy version 1. So it gives you some information about what it does. But our Bootstrap version 4.53 depends on this version, so I'm okay with adding popperjs 1.16.1. Okay. Again, these little warnings and messages are really great from npm and from yarn, and it tells you if packages work together because one package might depend on another package. Okay, so Bootstrap, jQuery, and Popper, we're good now. Let's do it clear. 2.6.0 is sufficient, probably, Andre, but I'm just trying to stick with what we have here in terms of our code. The next one is I want to use a library for nicer font icon fonts. A lot of times when we go somewhere, we might have some pages that have some nice icon fonts, and there's a great library that I like to use called Font Awesome. So Font Awesome, and Font Awesome, I'm going to put this link here inside of your week 1 so you can see it as well. So again, it's create a link. So Font Awesome. So what is Font Awesome? Well, it's really excellent, is what it is. Font Awesome creates little icon fonts, and it does it for us. They're little vector icons. So for example, if I want to look for a home icon, I can search for an icon that's home. You can see that there's several icons it proposes, and they're different than bitmaps. They're not bitmaps. I want to add these into my navigation. So if I go to home, as an example, you can see that the home icon is actually a vector graphic that's scalable. And this is great for mobile, right? So mobile, different screen sizes and all that stuff, we want to be able to scale our fonts up. And the way to do that is to use some kind of vector graphic. So notice that there's a little code hint right here when we want to use this. I want to be able to embed Font Awesome. And if I go back, to our start page, and I want to go to start, where it says start, One thing to know is how to do it. I could download it. I could go with npm. I can use yarn. Notice there again, there's like a bunch of ways of doing it. Let's go to the yarn way of doing it. So I want to use yarn. Let's see if it tells us what to do. And yeah, it tells us right here, npm install -- save, blah, 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 if you want to use npm. Or you can use yarn add /font_awesome free. You can copy it here, copy the code here, right? Yarn add @fort_awesome /font free. And when I go back to my my page, I can just right click and it should copy this in. Worst case scenario, you can always type it in. Yarn add @fort_awesome /font free and press enter. And then it'll add that requirement to our page as well. So now I have 4 dependencies. I have Fort Awesome, Bootstrap, jQuery, and popper.js. Notice that anything that starts with an @ symbol, it kind of comes up further up the line in alphabetical order, and then it goes it lists everything alphabetically inside of your dependencies property. Notice also that since we're looking at JSON objects, that dependencies is actually a sub object. All right, think about properties as you have an object within an object, right? Because I have curly braces here, right? So dependencies is actually an object and it has its own properties, right? These are properties and these are the values of the properties. Here's something we can do. If I wanted to, the reason why we also want to use the package.json file is it adds node modules, right? Whenever I add my packages, it adds the packages, the structures and the libraries here in node modules. And notice what I've done is I've added 2,000 files or more to my project, right? 2,000 files is huge. If I put this up online or if I give it to you, there's a lot of files I got to give you. So a lot of times what we don't do is we do not include node modules when I put things up on GitHub. So what if I was to remove node modules? Well, I wouldn't have the libraries, right? Let me just remove them. I'm just going to delete them to show you what we can do with yarn. You don't have to do this, just watch. So if I delete node modules, right? I mean, we have to have them because we want to use the libraries, right? But I have this, I have my manifest. So once I have my manifest, I can always issue a yarn install. And what it does is it goes out, looks at the manifest, and downloads all the node modules. So this is a great way of, I just need to give you the manifest, and once I've given you the manifest, you can just issue a yarn install, and everything can be downloaded in your files. For our practical projects and so on, I may just give you a package.json with no node modules, and then all of a sudden it'll just install everything you need in your node modules folder. All right, so that's it. We've done our dependencies, but we haven't really done anything with our index.html, right? Should we be deleting our own node modules when putting it into GitHub? No, let's not do that for now. We'll do it later, Nick, but for now we're gonna hold everything together. And you'll see why later, okay? So I want to start changing our index.html so that it has, I can use Bootstrap and Font Awesome and all that stuff. Let's get going on that now. So we want to put our, because of specificity, that's what CSS is all about. If we want to do custom styles, it should come after anything we do with Bootstrap. So we want to put Bootstrap before and Font Awesome before. We want to inject Bootstrap and Font Awesome here. And we're going to use Emmet to do it. We're going to say link and then CSS. And then we're going to say, instead of content, we're going to say /, right, node modules. And we're going to use Bootstrap first. We're going to select Bootstrap. And then it's going to be dist. And then it's going to be CSS and bootstrap.min.css is what we want to use. That's the first installation. Okay. The next one is going to be Font Awesome. Link, CSS. And we want to, again, wipe this out and go / node modules / @Fort Awesome, Font Awesome free. And what we want to use is CSS, and it's all.min.css. That's the next one, all.min.css. Again, I'm just getting this stuff from the node modules folder. Later on, what we would do is replace these links with CDN links to the content delivery network because it'll be better in a production environment. But for us, because we're in a development environment, this is fine for us. Okay. Would I please zoom in a little? I mean here inside there. I can try. Let us modify my terminal values. If I edit, I think it's preferences here. If I do, just going to make sure I don't mess things up. Text editor. Page size is 10. Font size is 18. I'm already pretty big, but I can go to 20. It might be too big, but whatever. Okay, let's see how that looks now. How's that? Is that a little bit better for you? Okay. So, okay, so if you look here, then we have all that meta-CSS. So this is our CSS section. We can remove the space there. And if I just save this without putting the JavaScript requirements, and if I look at my page, you can see immediately that something's changed. Our hello world is now, the styling for hello world is much different than what it was before. Okay. Before it was like Times New Roman, and now we know that Bootstrap is already in play because of this. Okay. But let's enable some of the functionality of Bootstrap. That's the next thing that we want to do down here. So again, we want to add a couple spaces. Our JavaScript file should come after everything else. So the first thing we want to add is jQuery. So we're going to be using jQuery later on anyway. This is a great place to do it. We'll say script source, right? And we're going to say /scripts/ actually, sorry, let me go back to that. Node modules / jQuery is what I meant. And we want to go to dist, and we want to go to jQuery.min.js. Okay, so that's jQuery. Now, this is the tricky part. This is the part that's changed over the last little while. Script source, and I want to /node modules /bootstrap /dist /js, and I want to get bundle.min.js. That's what I want. Bundle.min.js. This Bootstrap bundle includes POPOVER.js, and it takes care of everything that we need from a kind of a results perspective. All right, there we go. So we've got most of the functionality if we've done everything correctly. Let's check to see if this is causing an error in our code. And if I go to console, you should not see an error. Have a nice day. Have a nice day is there because we put that in there in here. Have a nice day. But what we want to do is we want to say like app started. Let's just change this to app started for now. And you can see that that immediately changes here as well. All right. All right, let's go back to my index.html. So this is where you should have in your index.html at this point. This is what yours should look like. Okay, I'm just going to close this off because you don't need it right now. Okay, that's what you should have. One thing to note is I want to start using Bootstrap styles, right? Because we have this. And I'm going to introduce some of the stuff to you. And you're going to learn how to do Bootstrap by doing it. All right. Notice that one thing that I want to change is here in Bootstrap, we have no margin between hello world pretty much on the left-hand side or the top. Let's add some margin. And the way to do that with Bootstrap is we'll have a class called container in here, right? So container, what it does is it adds margin to my code right away. Take a look at that. So now we know Bootstrap is working. I'm just tapping into that Bootstrap class. Okay, that's all I'm doing here. We need to see this as well. So I'll do this now between the two. Okay. So container is what I've added in there. And there's also something called container fluid. If you want to have the, if you don't want to have too much margin, you can put it back the way it is. So container and container fluid. We want container for us because we want a little bit of margin. So this is where for our hello world. Okay. We'll talk about other layout options later. Now what I want to do is I want to add a nav. I could type it by myself, but there's some great examples up on Bootstrap. let's go to Bootstrap and get that example. So I'm going to go up to Bootstrap, and under Bootstrap there's Docs, and under Docs, if I scroll down on the left-hand side, there's Components. Under Components, there's a pile of them, examples. I want to go to Navbar, and if I go to Navbar, you're going to see that scroll down, 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 down until there's a Navbar example right here, right? Again, it's about, kind of partly down the page. Again, steps. I went to Docs, I went to Components, I went to Navbar. That's what I did. On the right, you can see I can copy to clipboard, which I'm going to do, copy to clipboard. And then I'm going to skip back here into my page, and I want to inject it right here underneath the body tag. So I'm going to leave a space because we're going to need that later. Okay, so I've got this big form, and I want to save it, right? And I want to see what that looks like on my page. All I've done is get this little navbar, and I want to check to see if it works. Notice that immediately I have my navbar here, right? It injected a navbar. Yay. And what I want to search for is any functionality. Notice that this doesn't work. And I've been having some trouble with the latest version of Bootstrap doing this, where the functionality is just not happening. We're going to fix this later on in a later video. I'm going to investigate why, because normally it would totally work, but now things have changed. And it's not super important right now, but eventually it will be important. Okay, so, but what it does is, by the way, this little button that shows up here is called the hamburger. That's what we normally call it, the hamburger, because there's like, the top bun and the meat in the middle and the bottom bun. That's what it looks like. So people call it the hamburger. Okay, on the left, we have all this information. I have a kind of a white navbar or a lighter navbar. I'd like to make it dark. Let's change it. So I'm going to say navbar dark, and then background dark. Let's change this like this. So immediately change the styles if I save it to a dark navbar like this. Okay. The next part, what I want to do is I want to skip down to where it says my navbar link. My first navbar link is the home link. If you notice here, see this home? I like this one, but nothing else. Right? I don't want the other links. So let's get rid of everything underneath this navbar link, the first navbar link that's active. So all this stuff, let's say down just until the UL, I want to get rid of. So basically what you have is a UL with one link item, one link item. And what that looks like when I expand this just a touch, right, is you'll see that I get home with a search bar. Okay. I don't care much for the search bar because we're not going to use it. Let's get rid of it. That search bar is in the form area right here in the nav bar. So we just can get rid of it like this. So just get rid of that and save. And now there's no more form. Okay. On the left, we have our nav link, but notice here it says ME Auto, MB2. If your navbar is not styled, then somehow Bootstrap's not working for you. Yeah, that means that your Bootstrap somehow, when you did this, you didn't put the right thing in there, or Bootstrap's not enabled. Maybe you have to save your file. I'm not sure why it's working like that for you, Nick. But I'm going to put this up on GitHub in a second for you, and then you'll have everything. So what I want to do here is, if you notice on the right, it says if I want to take this home button or this home link, and instead of hugging it next to the nav bar, I want to go over here. I can just indicate where it says ME Auto. I'm going to put ML Auto, and ML Auto will send my home link on the right side. Okay, and there's also, in the actual page that I'm making, there's also something called a navbar brand. This navbar brand just says navbar. Let's change this to WEBD6201. And if I save that, again, you'll see that that's the navbar brand that's changed. Okay, pretty simple. I want to add Font Awesome. I want to check Font Awesome now to make sure that works. And the way to check that, I'm just going to maximize for a second. The way to check that is to add a Font Awesome font right here before the home tag, the home text node, which is right here. I want to add font awesome here. So the way to do that is if I go back to the web here and I go to font awesome, let's investigate some of this stuff, right? Here's font awesome. I can search for home again at the top. And if I search for home, it's going to give me a selection of different kind of home icons, even an igloo, right? Let's go with this home, right, as an example. And notice that on the top here, there is a little URL. I class equals to FAS FA home. I want to just click on it. Once I click on it, I've copied it to my clipboard, and I can go back to my nav bar and paste it in like so. Notice the space. I definitely want to have a space between my I tag and my home button, my home link. Why? Because if I don't put that space in, then it's right next to each other. If I save now and I go back to having it on the left-hand side, you can see now that I have a little home over here. Okay, and that is the icon font that I talked about before. If the icon font is too small for you, and I think it's too small for me, right? You can certainly change this. So FAS, FA home, and you can put another class, which is FA large. And if I press save there, it'll make the actual icon bigger, right? There's other sizes. You can choose FA extra small, FA extra large, and so on. Okay, so that's FA large. Just for the sake of making this look easier, I'm just gonna maximize this 1 second. I'm gonna break this out into several lines. So I'm gonna say that sure, there's an anchor tag, but I'm also gonna say that this is gonna be here, and we're gonna put the so you can see it kind of like this. So this right here, from this list item down to here, is one link. Notice that there really isn't a link. It's just a hashtag right now because we don't have links to any other pages. There's only one home page right now. We also have this other class that says active, and we don't want to make all pages active. Active makes my link look bright white, and I don't want my inactive links to look like that. So when I copy it, I'm going to copy this link now. Copy, paste, and let's make another link. And I'm going to make a 5-page site with you right now, very quickly. And the 5 pages that I normally add are home, about, products, services, and contact us. Okay, so 5 pages. So let's add the about page. We'll have the same home icon for now, which will change in a second. Okay, so home, about. We're going to take away the, notice I took away the active link from this. And I'm going to start copying and pasting. So paste, paste, paste. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? There's 5 pages. So home, about, products, services, contact. Okay. Home, about, products, services, contact. But unfortunately, if I go back to what it looks like, you have homes everywhere, and which doesn't make any sense, right? What we want instead of this is some other icons here. So let's choose some other icons. So if I go to contact, let's start with that one. It might suggest a contact, right? But maybe what I want is something that's more indicative of a phone. I want people to contact me somehow, right? Or connect with me through email, something like that. So you can choose one of those things to get a hold of me. Contact, maybe we'll use the @ symbol, to contact us, to make it different. Notice what it is the @ symbol actually has @ in it. So what it would be is FAS FA-@ All right, let's try that. So FAS, and this is for the contact page, FA-@ if I like that symbol, okay? The next one that I want to use is, that's the @ symbol. Let's do services. Let's say if is there some kind of thing that helps us with services? And the answer is not really. Sometimes you got to be creative. And I think from a services perspective, maybe I can think of using a map, some road signs, map signs for services. I think that's pretty good. So let's use that one instead. So it's map-signs that I'm using, right? So again, under services, I'm going to go FA map-signs. Okay, map signs. And maybe for products, I'm going to have, there is no products. If I type in the word products, it's actually going to give me nothing. Like there is nothing except for P for product hunt, which is something else. But we can think of things like a grid or a panel or some kind of menu, right? We want to have, right? So maybe we want a menu or something like that that we can have. And we can search down here for something that makes sense, right? And sometimes we can be creative and just like, I want brain as my products, all right? So we can just put in brain for the products. I mean, it's up to you, or a cog or something like that, okay? And I know there's one that's really cool for about, which is info. Let's just use info. So if I press save here, and now if I scroll back, and I go back to this thing, you can see that I have different symbols for everything. And again, symbols are great because they tell us a story as opposed to, and maybe brain is the wrong symbol, but you can also make your own if you really want to. We're not going to do this in this course. This is just getting you going on some content because we want to be able to manipulate the content with JavaScript. We can't manipulate something that doesn't exist, right? So we have to kind of put something in place, which is what we're doing here. All right, so this is pretty good. We have, some content that's in here. I'm going to put this up on GitHub. This is a great place to put this up on GitHub because I've added, my navigation template. This is my main nav. Before I do that, though, I'm going to put a little comment with HTML, right? So it's going to be main nav. That's what this is. By the way, a lot of times, remember we talked about semantic HTML, we want to put this in some kind of header. So we can have a header tag. And in the header tag, I want to grab all this nav, right? And it's going to be inside of my header. Why is that? Because it makes semantic sense. My header, an introductory content for my, my stuff. This is the header, which is my navigation, right? All right, so that is my main nav. If there's extra spaces, you can leave them or remove them. It's up to you from a styling perspective. I like to remove it, but I want to keep the links separate. Sometimes I want to be able to identify each of the links and go in there and modify them one by one. But again, this is a great place to put it up on GitHub. I'm going to use Control backtick to bring up my little terminal. And because I've got Git and GitHub running here already, and I've already done a Git repo, I can clear the screen and say git add dot. Just like we've done before. It's going to add everything. Those 2,000 files is going to add them in, right? And then git commit -m, and I'm going to say added main nav, main navigation. Okay, that's my commit message. It's going to put all those files inside of my commit. And then finally, git push, which is going to push everything up to GitHub. So that's the process, right? And I'm going to keep doing that every time we add a new feature. So if I go back up now to GitHub, and I want to take a look and see what's happened with our project, which is week 1C, we can see clearly that I've done added main nav in here. And for Nick and for anyone else who, if it's not working for you, please check in your index.html that you have what I have. And check your package.json to make sure that that is the same as well. Okay, so you can actually look in here, index.html, and you can see it. Sometimes what happens is, and this is what happens, when we download a project, then what happens is we might get a situation where there's a folder inside of another folder, and that causes the issue. Remember, what I've got going on here might be looking a little bit different than you. On the left, this is a great way of looking at it. I only have one folder. This one, week 1A, right? If you have several folders in here, that are called week 1A or WEBD6201 blah, 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 right? Then that's why some of this is has gone awry for you, potentially, right? So make sure that your folder structure looks exactly like mine. If yours is different, that could cause an issue. All right, so we've done font awesome. We've also put in, some pages and so on. The next thing I want to put in is a fixed navigation bar at the bottom of my screen. So again, nav bar, it has a bunch of a nav bar, and if you scroll down, it has other really cool options. Like for example, it talks about how to add drop-down links, and you can add forms and all kinds of other stuff that you can kind of go in here. It talks about text. If I want to just add text onto a nav bar, but it doesn't actually link to anything. So nav bar text is what we use for that in the class. And color schemes, there's some built-in color schemes, and you can find other ones online as well. Containers to container navigation, placement, fixed top, and fixed bottom. This is what I want, fixed bottom. So again, I'm in navbar and I'm at where it says fixed bottom. And if you just search for fixed bottom, it'll pull this up. I want to copy this and I'm going to go back to my page. So back to my page here, and let's maximize. So I'm going to maximize so I can do that and get rid of this for a second. Scroll all the way down. And I want to put this underneath my div tag for my container, right? I want to put it in a footer. So I'm going to type in footer, tab, and then paste in that nav bar, right? So here's my footer. So again, I got a footer and I got a header, right? What it says is navbar fixed bottom, navbar light, background light. Let's accept this that time. And instead of putting an anchor tag in here, I don't want an anchor tag. Instead, what I want is maybe something like an H4 tag. And my H4 tag is going to be maybe my copyright statement. So we're going to say and copy, which is basically that it's going to give me that copyright symbol. You could also use, instead of and copy, because we've got our copyright in Font Awesome. Let's use Font Awesome. If I just did this, by the way, let's see what I get when I just do this and copy. If I go back to my page, you can see that I got the copyright symbol, yeah? But that's kind of an old school way of doing it. Let's see if I can use Font Awesome, which is more scalable. So if I go back to Font Awesome, and if maybe there's something in here that's going to have copyright. So if I go copyright, yeah, there's a couple of copyright options here, which is pretty cool. I want to choose copyright to go in there. And you can just say, I want to grab this I tag, copyright. I want to go back down to this and put that in here, right? Let's see how that works. So copyright. And if you don't like the size, we can change the size. Let's go back to our page to see what that looks like, right? When I save it, so save. And you can see that it looks pretty cool, right? Copyright, it's nice. And at copyright, and then inside my H4 tag, I can leave a space and say something like the words copyright, right, 2021, right? We're going to change this later on where we can actually inject the date. For now, we're just going to leave it as so. Right, copyright 2021, there's a little nav bar. And what I've done is I've made it to the bottom. I've put it to the bottom because I'm using fixed bottom. All right. So that's, again, this is a bootstrap style. So we've got some footer. And you know what? Just for demonstration purposes, let's put this up on GitHub too. So control backtick, clear the screen, git add dot, git commit -m, added, whatchamacallit, fixed bottom nav, and then git push. Again, that's the process. Add, commit, push. Add, commit, push. And keep doing that over and over again. Okay. Yay. So that pushed it up. And this is good, but instead of making it a div tag, let's make this, we'll just rename it to main. And notice that Visual Studio Code actually renames the closing tag as well. Okay, so there's our container. We have some stuff here, and we have a hello world, right? If you don't like the hello world because it's too simple, sometimes what we want to use for our first page, at least, if you go back to Bootstrap, we have other things we can do. Again, there's a ton of components here. If you notice, buttons and breadcrumbs and button groups and carousels and drop downs and a bunch of other stuff and popovers. And these are really good, right? As an example as well. They have pagination. There's also something called layout, which we're going to look at. Layout talks about how we can lay things out. What Bootstrap does is it gives us a chance to lay things out using a 12-column grid. Well, so approximately 8% of each of our of the width of our page, 8% each column. We can adjust where we want to put our content by using columns, each column. And the way this works is I can say that, hey, look, I want to have 3 columns. I want to have 2-column layout. I can have a 12-column layout. I can do all these things. And we're going to explore this throughout the course. Okay. There's a bunch of other crazy stuff in here as well, which it's going to be really nice to look at. So everything from alerts to badges to carousels to drop downs and a bunch of other stuff that we're going to look at, popovers and pagination, helpers when it comes to how things work, different utilities that Bootstrap has built in, and Bootstrap just keeps getting better and better. So really, really cool stuff. And again, you know, you're going to see, we're going to use a lot of this stuff as we go. And one thing that Bootstrap also does to keep current is it removes stuff that doesn't make any sense anymore, right? All right. Let's go back to getting started for a second, and let's make sure we've done everything. So let's review. We've linked, and by the way, sometimes you might get a really weird thing where this doesn't work. We've linked in our CSS some kind of Bootstrap styles. In the JavaScript section, we've linked some kind of JavaScript on the bottom of our Bootstrap, right? It notices components. Curious about components explicitly required in JavaScript and POPOVER. It actually shows all the different components that require alerts, buttons, carousel, collapse requires this as well. And it actually gives you a little starter template. So it says, here's popper.js, right? And it gives you popper.js and bootstrap.min.js. It breaks it out. So one thing we can also check if something's not working is you can always try the CDN instead. Let's try this out. So I'm just going to grab these 2 lines, right? And again, I'm showing you this because it's for testing purposes. We're doing testing. We're having a problem with our code and we don't know where it is. We know one of these 2 lines or both of these lines, maybe this bundle line, or maybe there's something missing. Maybe I have to explicitly put in popper or something. But let's replace this line here for a second with those 2 lines. All right, so I just copy paste it from here. So I'm using the CDN for this part and save. And let's see if we have our functionality that I saw before. So again, I'm just going to go and make this go to the right. Make this go to the right over here. And what I want, what I'm hoping to get is a functional dropdown. This is how it should look. So this is how Bootstrap should be working with the CDN. All right. It's not though. So when I use my local files, the CDN works. So I know that that's okay, right? And notice how it's using 2.5.4, right? So I want to fix my problem. And again, this is something that's changed over the last little while, and that's why it's not working. I'm also using something called dist.js bootstrap.min.js. So popper.js.core is looking like what I need to download. So I need to modify what I did before, go backtrack a little bit. And I definitely want to grab Bootstrap at 5.0 beta, right? So this is something that it's using for all this stuff to work. I'm using, instead of Bootstrap at next, I'm using Bootstrap at 5. Or 4. Whatever. All right, so let's fix this problem because I don't want this issue to crop up or crop up later. So we'll leave this in place. We don't need to change this, right? but we need to modify some of this stuff. Again, I could just use the CDNs, but I'd like to try and use the local files to fix our problem, and then we'll stop for the day. All right, so we see that we have Bootstrap 4.5.3, right? And let's do some maintenance on our files. So clear. And let's remove Bootstrap and Popper.js. Let's try and do that first. So we'll say yarn remove Bootstrap. Yarn remove Popper.js. And let's follow the precepts of what it says inside of our installation steps. So if I go back to this and I go into download for Bootstrap, right? Remember that there is a yarn module that it recommends. So let's do this. Let's do a yarn add Bootstrap at next instead of what we did last time. So yarn add, right? And just like it says here, Bootstrap at next. Bootstrap at next. And when we do that, if it finds it, it says, okay, so here's, it says choose version of Bootstrap for this list. Use arrow keys. 2? That's not right. That's terrible. Bootstrap at next, right? Let's undo that change because I'm just following what it says here. See, Bootstrap at next. You can also see that what we want is we want npm to install the latest version. So what this actually did was wrong, right? So they haven't updated this or whatever. But notice what we want is the version that we want is 5.00 beta, this thing right here, okay? So what we could do instead, because we want 5.00 beta, let's undo Bootstrap. So we'll say, again, we'll go yarn, remove, right, Bootstrap, right? What did we do? Oh, Bootstrap. Ha ha ha. That's why I have a problem. I put in the wrong stuff. Yarn remove Bootstrap. No matter what, no matter the reason why it didn't work. Let's try that again now. So it's not them, it's me. Yarn add Bootstrap. Next. Oh, surprise. Okay, yeah, there. That's how it should look. Woo. Awesome. Right? All right, and now let's get that Popper.js back on. So going back to Popper.js, right, where it had Popper.js/core, I want to go with this one because that's what we want to do. Instead of using npm, we're going to use yarn add at Popper.js/core. So yarn add at Popper.js/core. And if we did everything right, we should have it back the way it was with 2.6.0. Now, let's be careful here because 2.6.0 is more than what's required for Bootstrap, right? So if you notice index.html, when we have our CDN, it uses 2.5.4, right? So this should be very similar to what we did before. Let's undo the changes here now. So we'll undo. Let's redo. Let's undo the changes that I did here. So instead of using Bootstrap bundle min.js, let's use Popper. Let's add Popper in here as well. First of all, let's see what this does. Does this still do enough for us? Because before we didn't even need Popper. So the way to check this is to bring up our files. I've saved it, and I've gone here and refreshed the page just to make sure. And I'm going to make it so that I have my little thing here, and then sure enough, just with Bootstrap bundle.min.js, we have what looks like functionality. To test this, let's just remove this Bootstrap functionality, save it, and then when it syncs, let's see if this works. And we should see it's not working, right? And then first we want to make it fail, right? And then let's put it back. Oops. Then let's put it back. This one. Right? And if I put it back and I go back here, now it works great. So the fix was, let's go to the fix. Our packages have to be looking like this. At Popper.js/core, at 2.6.0, and Bootstrap at 5.0.0 beta 1. I'm okay with that if it works for me. So hey, we just made a break fix. We had a broken part of our code. This is a great place to put it up on GitHub because we fixed our problem. right? And it works, it's functional now the way it should function. Let's put another commit up on GitHub. So clear, and we'll say git add dot, right? Clear, git commit -m, and we'll say fixed bootstrap bug, because that's what we did. We had a bootstrap bug. And we'll say git push, and that'll push everything up to GitHub. So again, we did a git add, a git commit, and a git push. Same process over and over again. And we're good to go. So now you have everything I have. And my friends, if you couldn't follow along, or if somehow things didn't work for you, what I'd like you to do is take a look at this video later on if you need to. And what I'd like you to do is make sure that next week, and for the people that are watching live on YouTube, make sure that for next week that everything is working and that you're at this point in the state of your files so that we can jump off from this point. So I can actually do some JavaScript with you guys next week. Because this is all set up for us for next week. But it's really good because we learned about a lot of little things. We learned about package.json today and what that is. It's a manifest for our dependencies for all of our packages that we want to put in node modules. We learned about the CDN, the content delivery network, that we can kind of swap out some of these scripts and the links that we put into our local files, and we can swap them out with links that work with kind of online, right? And from a production perspective, we want to go there. From a development perspective, we want to stick with, kind of working locally, all right? We also installed Bootstrap and jQuery, and we also installed POPOVER and Font Awesome. And we said that we're not going to do CSS. Bootstrap is a great little CSS framework, and that's where we're using it. And we're using Font Awesome for some interesting fonts that we're getting. The last thing I'd like to do today is inside of our app.js, I'd like to check if jQuery works, right? So what I'd like to try and do is add a button to the page, all right? So let's do that. So inside of my index.html, and then underneath where it says my hello world, I want to kind of add a button. And we can do that in a couple of ways, right? I can just add a button, and I can just put a button that says, click me. Let's do that. A button that's called click me. If I don't put any styles in the button, right? And if I look at my page, let's take a look at my page now, right? So if I refresh, right? By the way, what happens sometimes, and if I look to my command, it's crashed my light server, and I need to initialize it again. Sometimes it happens when I do all those changes. And I'm not really worried about it, and neither should you. Notice I have my click me button, but there's like no styling whatsoever. It's terribly ugly. Let's add some styling from Bootstrap. So we can say, let's put a class button primary, right? And we'll make it button large, right? Let's see if that makes any sense, right? So there we are. There's a button that's blue, right? We have some Bootstrap styles. So we can see that when I click my button, it does something, right? Pretty cool stuff, right? And it didn't take anything at all, right? So pretty cool. Well, I want to add a ID for the button. We'll call it the click me button. We can do that by just simply putting an ID. We'll call this the click me button. There we are. And this is kind of a preview of what we're going to do next week, right? So I added a click me button, right? And I want to look at the console for a second, just to get there. Here's our console, right? And we can refresh. App started. So in my app.js, what I want to do is I want to test to see if I can hook into that button. And this is a preview of what we're going to do next week. So we're going to stop after this, I swear. If we use jQuery, right, then we're going to say something that looks like this. Hey, jQuery, I want to search for something that has an ID of button. So I want to search for the ID of button, right? And it's, sorry, the idea of click me button, click me button. I think it's what I called it. Let me just take a look at that. There's click me button. I'm testing jQuery here to make sure that it works. And then what I want to do is on click, right? If the button has been on, and notice it's a method. If I put on the method and I suggest the method is click, on click, that's the selector, right? So let me try this again. On click, and if I hover over by the on, it tells me what I can do with on, right? On click, here's the event, here's the selector, and then I can have the handler. So the handler goes kind of inline. We talked about a couple of really good ways of doing it and a couple of really ugly ways of doing it. This is the old way of doing it, where you can put a handler like inline, and we can make this kind of going here, and to say something like a console log click me button was clicked, right? So this is kind of how it would work with jQuery. I don't like jQuery because what the heck does this mean? How semantic is that? Not semantic is the answer. So if we go back to this, and if I click the button, and if it works, you'll see click me button was clicked. Every time I click it, it'll do that. It'll just count up all that stuff, right? So that's how it kind of works, all right? So we know jQuery is working. We've just tested jQuery, but let me show you what it looks like to do the same thing without jQuery. So no jQuery. I want to say something like this: document dot get element by ID, right? And we can say something like the element that we're getting is the click me button element, right? And what I want to do is I can name this element. I can say something like my click me button. I don't have to do it this way. I'm just going the long way. My click me button is equal to this element. When I see this equal sign, in your mind as C++ developers, you should say, I'm getting a reference to the click me button element. That's what I'm getting, right? Here's my click me button element. I'm getting a reference. Once I have a reference, I'm just breaking it down here. I could just simply do a click me button dot add event listener of the click event. And then I could write an inline function like we did before with jQuery, or I can use a fat arrow expression like so, which is the same kind of idea. Again, this is a preview. Don't fret about it if it looks really ugly or you don't know what this all means. And then here I would do a console log of click me button was clicked. Okay, this is another way of doing it. So the only difference is I'm breaking it down into two steps. One step is I'm getting a reference to the ID, and this is what jQuery does really well for you. It does it in one. By the way, you can do chaining, so I can do document.getElementById dot add event listener, and I can avoid doing all the other stuff. One thing to note is when I hover over, Visual Studio Code gives me the type. It's identifying click me button as an HTML element, which is good. And jQuery doesn't really do that, right? And what this is saying is, hey, look at the document, right? And what I want you to do is find all elements that match the ID that has click me button. And I only care about the first one. That's what this is saying, right? So get that element, the first element by ID. It's the click me button. It doesn't know that it's a button. It just knows that it's an HTML element, right? And there's other ways we're going to select next week to show different options, right? And then what I want to say is, here's my click me button now. I have a reference to the click me button. I've hooked into it. I add an event listener to it, just like we did here when we added an event listener to the window object, right? I add an event listener to it, and I listen for the click event. When the click event is raised, then I have a callback function. You can make this callback function named. So we can make a new named function called click me button clicked, right? Or you can make it inline if it's ever going to happen once. Like if you only one button's ever going to use it, it doesn't make sense for us to make a named function. We can make it write it inline like this, okay? And then we're good to go. All right, so that is where I want to stop. Let's check to see if this works. So again, I've just updated my stuff, and I'm using vanilla JavaScript instead of jQuery, but I've tested both. And this is where I want to put this up on GitHub. So again, going back to this, going back to command, clearing the screen, I want to say git add dot git commit minus M, and I'll say added, or, you know, test for jQuery ran fine. As an example, that's what I did, and then git push. Good to go. So I know that jQuery is enabled in our project, in our template right now. And I'm gonna come back to Nick in a second with his problem. Hopefully, Nick, have you solved your problem with your blue font links and all that stuff, or no? You've solved it. Great. So we've done a couple things. We've tested everything. We've put things up on GitHub, and we've done all that stuff. So remember that next week we're going to start our labs. And just to remind you guys how labs and in-class exercises. In-class exercises, the way they work for us is when I run an in-class exercise with you, what happens is I'm asking you to follow along with what I've done, and then you submit, right? And then once you submit that in-class exercise, it's just you almost like practicing what you're doing. All right. So what I'd like you to do for next week to prepare is make sure you go through this process again. See if you can do it from scratch. If you need to watch the video, watch the video. Or if you can remember some of your own steps, see if you can experiment a little bit with the framework that I've just given you, because this is what I'm doing. I'm going to build from here, right? From this position onward. So make sure that all your stuff for Bootstrap and for Font Awesome and for stuff. Maybe what you want to do for simple changes is change up the Font Awesome fonts that I used and choose something else. Maybe add a link or two, right? Maybe you want to add some content to switch it up here, or add a different button. Or maybe you want to try using Bootstrap to position the button to the right of my hello world, like way to the right, right? Or some kind of other things that you want to put into Bootstrap. So check it out. It's really on you to be interactive with this thing, and I'm going to show you more stuff next week. But really, what we've done this week is set the groundwork or a foundation for everything that we're going to do moving forward. All right, that's it for me. Any questions from you guys before we end for the day? I know we covered a lot. Well, if everyone is good, then thank you so much. And I'll see you all next week during our regular class time. I'm going to stop recording now, and I'll take any kind of questions offline that people have. All right. I'm not recording on YouTube.